From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. President Obama addressed the nation tonight, a speech delivered before a live audience, as the Associated Press put it, defending the first war launched on his watch. The president said the U.S. acted by launching those airstrikes 9 days ago to prevent a massacre of the Libyan people by Moammar Khadafy. He said Khadafy's not a target and that the U.S. is acting as part of this coalition to protect civilians. He talked about the uses and limits of military power while he is president and said there will be times like this when our safety isn't directly threatened, but our interests and values are. Our coverage begins with White House correspondent Savannah Guthrie at Washington's Fort McNair, where the president spoke tonight. Savannah, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. This was the president's chance to explain his actions in Libya, put them in context, and to highlight what aides consider a success story. The president intervening militarily on behalf of an international coalition to stop Khadafy from massacring his own citizens.
We were faced with the prospect of violence on a horrific scale. To brush aside America's responsibility as a leader, and more profoundly, our responsibilities to our fellow human beings under such circumstances, would have been a betrayal of who we are. Some nations may be able to turn a blind eye to atrocities in other countries. The United States of America is different. And as president, I refuse to wait for the images of slaughter and mass graves before taking action.
Mindful of those and worried about the U.S. getting involved in yet a third military conflict, the president emphasized that NATO is now taking over command and control of the operation, and he also took on critics who have suggested the U.S. should do more to oust Khadafy.
If we tried to overthrow Gaddafi by force, our coalition would splinter. We would likely have to put U.S. troops on the ground to accomplish that mission, or risk killing many civilians from the air. To be blunt, we went down that road in Iraq. Thanks to the extraordinary sacrifices of our troops and the determination of our diplomats, we are hopeful about Iraq's future. But regime change there took 8 years, thousands of American and Iraqi lives, and nearly $1 trillion. That is not something we can afford to repeat in Libya.
The president said the overthrow of Khadafy would not happen overnight, but he said history is not on Khadafy's side. He did not say how long the U.S. is prepared to stay involved militarily in Libya, Brian.
All right, Savannah Guthrie at the scene of the president's speech in Washington tonight. Savannah, thanks. And a quick program note, tomorrow night here on the broadcast, my interview with President Obama concerning this use of force in Libya. The president travels to New York tomorrow. Our conversation will take place then. We'll have it for you on Nightly News tomorrow night. In Libya tonight, anti-Khadafy rebels have taken advantage of the protection of this no-fly zone and the pummeling from the Allied airstrikes to make their biggest push yet to within striking distance of Sert. That's Khadafy's hometown. And if that city falls, it would be a big trophy for the rebels, strategically and symbolically. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is live tonight in the rebel-based city of Benghazi. And Richard, first off, how do you think this speech will play there?
It was a very emotional speech when heard from here at Benghazi. It's obviously the middle of the night here, but people will be extremely welcoming. When the president said that he didn't want to wait for images of mass graves, well, those mass graves would have been filled with the people of Benghazi. Now the rebels want these airstrikes to continue so that they can push forward and continue their advance. After advancing almost unchecked for 2 days, rebels are now having to fight for territory. In the desert outside Sert, rebels fired rockets today to attack Khadafy's troops, dug in miles away. Khadafy is making a stand here. Sert is his hometown and a gateway to Tripoli. Until now, the rebels have mostly relied on Western airstrikes. The rebels' lightning advance this weekend was more of a drive-through than a conquest. After NATO air power obliterated Khadafy's tanks and armored vehicles, government troops retreated. Some took off their uniforms. Others left behind half-eaten meals. Almost without resistance, the rebels advanced from Benghazi through Ajdabia to Brega, Ras Lanuf, Ben Jawed, all the way to the edge of Sert, covering 350 miles. But now that the rebels are having to fight, their supply line is thin. There's little fuel in the desert near Sert. The rebels fill up before heading to the front.
We will come to you, Gaddafi.
The rebels' plan is to capture Sert with Western air power clearing the way. Link up with the opposition in Misrata, and then make a final push to Tripoli. But as Western reporters saw firsthand today, Misrata remains a battleground, at least for now, with Gaddafi forces fighting rebels to a draw. Back in Benghazi, the unofficial rebel capital, there were victory parades today with a new sense of optimism. A rebel spokesman told us the opposition needs airstrikes to continue for at least a few more weeks.
We'd like them to be resolute, decisive, to continue what they have started, because results are beginning to bear fruit. And it seems that the time for Gaddafi is getting shorter and shorter.
Rebels warned if international military support stops or slows down, their gains could be erased. And in Benghazi, posters of those missing in this war are reminders to the rebels of what's at stake if they lose.
No sign in the president's speech tonight that he is walking away from the basic mission of protecting the opposition, protecting the Libyan people, and that will be very welcome here in Benghazi. Brian?
Richard Engel in Benghazi, Libya for us tonight. Richard, thanks. And there's more to report tonight on a part of this Libya story that surfaced over this past weekend when a Libyan woman purposely sought out Western news media at their hotel in Tripoli to tell a harrowing story of being assaulted by Gaddafi loyalists. While there are still a lot of questions tonight about exactly what happened, what we are learning is disturbing, like the incident itself. NBC's Jim Maceda has the latest from Tripoli.
It was a rare act of bravery fueled by despair. This Libyan woman reaching out on her own to a group of foreign reporters as they ate breakfast Saturday morning. Pointing to bruises on her face, she yelled, "Gaddafi did this." And even as hotel security restrained her, she screamed out her story. How she was stopped at a checkpoint outside Tripoli, held for 2 days by those she called Gaddafi's men, who she says gang raped her and beat her. By then, even the waitresses were turning on her, calling her a traitor, trying to hide her head as if that would silence her. In the chaos, cameramen were manhandled. This camera smashed beyond repair. At one point, this security guard seemed to reach for his weapon. She would not yet be able to tell her story. Only hours later did we learn her name, Iman al-Obeidi, 26 years old, living in Tripoli and from a prominent family.
I don't know where you taken me.
At first, the Libyan government suggested she'd been drunk, a prostitute, and perhaps mentally deranged, but backed off from all three claims.
We know that she's a sane person. She is in good health. She has serious claims about 4 or 5 individuals.
One of the alleged rapists, the son of a high-ranking police officer, according to some reports. In an interview with Al Jazeera TV, her parents held up a photo of Iman graduating from law school. Her mother said she's still being held in Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli, countering government claims that she'd been released. There are still many unknowns about Iman al-Obeidi and gaps in her story, but she's a disturbing example of what can happen here when someone has the courage to speak out. Jim Maceda, NBC News, Tripoli.
Elsewhere in the region, the city of Dara in southern Syria was again a flashpoint today. President Assad's security forces trying to crush the latest democracy uprisings. And in Yemen, the opposition took to the streets as well. Yemen's president has now pulled back on his offer to step down by the end of the year. And meantime, more than 100 people who were looting an ammo factory in Yemen are reportedly dead after something, perhaps a cigarette, touched off an explosion.